Hey everybody, welcome to another video review. This is the night before Christmas, Christmas Eve. For those of you who celebrate Christmas, I'm wishing you all a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. I hope to record this video and then upload it overnight. It'll be released on Christmas Day. I guess one of the advantages of making these video reviews raw and not really doing much work on editing and effects and all these type of things is that they can come out actually pretty quickly. I guess this is like my little joke Christmas gift for those of you who like statue reviews. So this is not too distracting. I have a splint on. I can explain it briefly. I have Decrevein's tenosynovitis, which is essentially carpal tunnel of the thumb ligament. It's in the first compartment. The sheath is very tight and inflamed. I've been dealing with it for well over a year, and multiple steroid injections haven't really resulted in any permanent relief. And so I did proceed with an operation to just open the sheath and relieve the pressure. So part of the recovery, you have to be in a, obviously non-immobilized, an immobilized splint so that the wrist can't really move. Luckily, my 4 other fingers are allowed to move, and my thumb can actually move at the distal joint. But this is going to need to be like this for at least 10 to 14 days. So yeah, in case you're wondering why I have this huge bulky splint on my hand, that explains that. So let's move on to the piece. This is a very special piece. Yeah, this is Isildur from the Fellowship of the Ring, the Lord of the Rings, and it's made by Weta Workshop. So there's a lot to talk about with this piece. I guess maybe I was thinking about doing a review for Isildur because the Lord of the Rings movies traditionally were released during the holiday season in December. And so during this Christmas, my thoughts did turn to that property and this statue from the property. This is a 1/6 scale piece released by Weta Workshop in a later wave. So the original series of 1/6 scale statues was done in conjunction with Sideshow, when again, collectible statues was in its infancy, I like to think. And after that, that partnership sort of ran its course when the movies had been, fully completed and released. They went their separate ways. Sideshow, of course, became very famous in the statue collecting market with their licenses, Star Wars and Marvel and DC, etc. And Weta Workshop and Weta Digital Effects and Weta Special Effects went on, of course, to become one of the premier special effects companies in the world for movies. And the thing is that that initial line of 1/6 scale figures were a bit more crude, as you can imagine, being again in its infancy. The likeness of some of the characters were very good, other times not so good. And they did miss quite a few important characters from the movies. They couldn't make them all. And so later on, after making The Hobbit, Weta Workshop then decided to revisit the Lord of the Rings. They, of course, have the license, and to fill some of the gaps with some of the characters that they never did have a chance to make. And not only fill the gaps, but also, of course, improve on the quality, the likeness, things like that. They also remade some of the pieces from the original collaboration that they felt maybe could have been done better. One of the things that comes to mind is the Argonath environment, which originally was released as, I think, it was like actually a packing gift or something for the extended edition of the Fellowship of the Ring. It was basically bookmarks and nowhere near the grandeur that such a collectible deserved. And so Weta Workshop, to their credit, went back and made a much, much better version of that. So those are sort of the examples that they decided to pursue when they went back to creating these pieces. Now, for me personally, as a collector, I had sort of left Weta behind. I've kind of gone on record on some of the problems I felt I had, especially with their more recent efforts in the mini helm line. But they do still make occasionally very, very good work, very good pieces. I feel like the price is a bit much sometimes. I always feel like they're a little bit overpriced, but in a way you're paying for the authenticity of the piece in the sense that they are being made by the, excuse me for the finger here, they are being made by the original company that created the effects for the movies. So for me, I recently decided to just not really get into collecting the 6th scale line and to limit myself to only certain characters or monsters I'm really very fond of, and those include Balrogs and trolls and dragons. So I have the 1/6 scale Smaug from the Desolation of Smaug from the Hobbit movie. This is the full, the large full-size statue, not the mini one. I bought the battle troll, from I think the Battle of the Five Armies. I got their, excuse me, I'm a little bit distracted here with a little bit of dust. I also got their reissued Balrog of Moria, which I really, really like that, their efforts there. I got their new cave troll of Moria, so not a battle troll, but the original cave troll, but with the orcs. But I've avoided humans. And so because of that, I didn't really pay very much attention to some of their announcements of new characters. And I missed the Isildur announcement. Or maybe I didn't miss it, but I know I looked at the email. I was like, it's a human being, it's Isildur. I'm not super interested, and so I passed on it. But then, as time went on, I do sometimes, read forum posts. I'm on the Facebook groups, and just over the years, I joined the Lord of the Rings Collectors Facebook group, and sometimes, certain pieces will be put on. And I actually saw Isildur again, and I realized what a really stunning collectible this was, and I became interested in trying to acquire it. Now, the original numbered edition of this piece is numbered at the 750. So 750 is rare. I mean, it's limited, but it's not as bad as 500. But still, it's not exactly, super common. And I think because of how desirable this piece is, it doesn't come up for sale very often. And I would say that anything less than $1,000 on him is actually a pretty reasonable deal. He can go for more than that. He's gone for as low as, I would guess, maybe 700 or so. But the trajectory for Isildur appears to be going up because people who own him usually don't let him go, because it is an exceptional work. And again, I'm fond of criticizing Weta, but I do want to give credit when it's due. This is a very, very good piece from them, and let's talk about why. So the first thing about him is that this is, of course, from the Fellowship of the Ring, after Isildur had defeated Sauron by cutting the One Ring from his gauntleted hand. This is a very famous scene from the movie. I would like to say an iconic scene, because this is the first thing that we saw in the movie theater, the prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring, and it was just stunning. Just kind of like this amazingly epic introduction where you kind of saw the battle that marked the end of the Second Age, where the combined armies of Gil-galad and Elendil, the Númenóreans and the elves and the high elves, marching together in unison to try to defeat Sauron and to have fought and pushed his forces all the way to Mount Doom. A remarkable achievement. And then, of course, Sauron coming out with the One Ring, and none could stand before him. And of course, he killed Elendil, and in his despair, with the broken shards of Narsil, Isildur, in a desperate kind of last gasp, swing, managed to cut that ring from the hand of Sauron. Actually, when I read the text, I don't think that necessarily that was the detail necessarily that this was done in terms of how it happened. I always got the impression when I was younger that they had actually managed to, through sheer force of numbers, push Sauron to the brink, and that they had actually forcibly removed the ring from his finger while Sauron was defeated. That was the impression I got while reading the text as a young man. I think it's accurate that the text never explicitly stated how this was done. They just said that Isildur had cut the ring from the hand of Sauron. But I think that the depiction in the movie is a lot more reasonable, or it makes more sense, because how could anyone have thought to defeat Sauron at his height with the ring on his finger, even with all the armies of Gil-galad and Elendil, and even with Gil-galad himself. How could this have done? It just seemed now in retrospect to be extraordinarily unlikely, and that probably the way that the film depicted it would be the only reasonable way it could have gone down, which is that it was through, again, a sheer twist of fate and happy accident that this was done, with Sauron perhaps being overconfident and just simply not being careful enough and not expecting, again, that desperate slash by Isildur with a broken sword to boot. So this is sort of from that scene in the aftermath, and it has so much going for it. I mean, if you look at the base, of course, you have the normal, the normal very classy black base with the map of Middle Earth, inscribed. But here they have a lot more detail, which is hiding the actual map. In some other bases, where it's more simple, you can see the entire map. So I won't dwell too much on the stony base, other than to say that it's very well done, a lot of good weathering, well painted. But it's essentially the sort of the volcanic ground of Mount Doom, where the battle occurred. Really interesting. You can see here they actually sculpted in the shards of Narsil on the base, which is a really neat touch. So you can see that the shards are kind of still on the ground. So this is the very place where Isildur snatched victory seemingly from the jaws of defeat. And then, of course, on the battlefield, which is an amazing touch, is a full 6th scale replica of Sauron's helmet. And in this case, when he destroyed the ring, or he severed the ring from Sauron's finger, the corporeal version of Sauron disintegrated, and all that was left was his armor. And again, there's that fantastic shot from the original movie, which showed the helmet of Sauron landing on the ground with this incredible thud. When you see this on the big screen with the sound and the bass and all of that, it's an unforgettable scene. And so this is sort of paying homage to that. This was the exact angle that the helmet made as it landed on the ground from the movie. And this is good enough. I mean, the detail is fine enough. It's basically identical to the original quarter scale mini helm from the mini helm line. I do own that, except that's in metal. This is in polystone, but in terms of the fine detail that you can see here, it's completely identical. It's in scale, and it attaches to a magnet in the back. So once again, very, very beautifully and nicely done. And that, together with the shards of Narsil on the ground, is a heck of a way to kind of start the story. So it's a beautiful base with the helm of Sauron. And not only is it here, but because of the size of it, you get to compare the helm with an actual human being, and you realize how incredibly intimidating Sauron would have been and how large, he was. And so it's a nice way of telling that story and giving you some more information, and by sort of setting the stage without having the actual Sauron. Now, obviously, Weta did make another version of the Sauron, very, very nice one. So you do have the original in its full glory, and that's meant to be paired with King Elendil. But in this case, of course, you can't do that. And so by putting this helmet on the base, it gives you, again, a very wonderful ability to show you how menacing he would have been by seeing how large he is, and how the helmet alone is almost as large as an entire torso of a regular human being. So that's the base. Now, moving up, you can see the wonderful Numenorian armor, and you can see the chainmail. There's a lot of talk about how the chainmail for the movies were made, and how literally millions of links had to be created of a fake chainmail that looked amazingly real, and they had to be kind of hand knitted together by these gentlemen. So here, in terms of the armor, you get to see the Numenorian armor and its stunning detail and excellent paint. So a lot of times I harp quite a bit on factory versus prototype, production versus prototype. And Weta is not immune to this. I mean, sometimes their production pieces definitely have some problems, but in this particular case, with the armor, they really outdid themselves. I mean, take a look at some of the detailing. You can see the individual rivets. You can see the Numenorian inscriptions and the script, and of course the beautiful detail of the chainmail. Both at the elbows, and as well as, of course, the front, protecting the legs. You can actually see the individual links. In my earlier review of the Mirkwood Palace Guards mini helm, I did point out the fact that the chainmail didn't look quite convincing enough, but for some reason here, with the polystone and not, let's say, plastic, they did a wonderful job. It looks way more convincing, especially these little touches like down here, where you can actually see a piece of chainmail just sort of, almost about to fall off. It just sort of shows you the battle damage of this whole thing. And of course, the Numenorian itself, you can see that this is the sort of the wings. They're seafaring people, and so bird imagery, flying seagulls, that type of thing, is very important to them. You can see the 7 stars inscribed there, and then of course this is actually right over here is the helm is represented on the helm of King Elendil himself. And you can see again all of these beautiful details of the armor on the sides here. Again, more chainmail. Take a look at the details on the gauntlets. You can see the blood stain on him, and all the way around. And then the tunic is a little bit more plain, but still, impressive. And then of course you can see chainmail all the way at the bottom. You can see the patterns on the edges. So just very, very beautifully done. I'm gonna back out so you can sort of appreciate what he looks like in his totality. I've already given you quite a bit of close-up detailing of the armor. So by and large, this is like a stunning piece of work in terms of the care that went into crafting this. The tunic looks good. There'll always be a little bit, of course, there'll always be a little bit of a weakness, trying to sculpt accurate, the accurate tunic, because the fold and that type of thing, you have to mimic leather, and that's hard to do. But I think they did a great job on that. In terms of the paint apps, it's a little bit flat, but that's there's a limit to what you can do. Obviously, with this, you can see it's a little bit dusty here. You can see the belt again, really, really close. You can see the texturing of that leather. You can see the scabbard moving all the way down. You can see the metal at the bottom. All just very, very accurate. The harness, the belts, everything, even the way it's knotted, and the buckle. I'm going to take a look here to show you. All of that is just beautifully done, extraordinarily detailed. And then, of course, you have the actual one ring itself that he's holding. One of the things that's kind of striking about this is how large it is. It looks way bigger. So this shows you how recently this is. he must have just cut it off of Sauron's hand. And again, from the Fellowship of the Ring, you remember that he held it in the palm of the hand, and the ring sort of magically shrank to the same size that you would see on a human finger. But initially, it was huge because it had to fit on Sauron's hand, or Sauron's finger, and he is much larger than a human being. So they honored this by basically giving you a ring that is freshly cut from Sauron's finger, and therefore much, much larger. So it's pretty stunning, because when you back up, and unfortunately I can't zoom up too close because my iPhone camera is not going to be able to give you that particular detail, but it's still, it's gold, it's very, very good, and it's very striking because, backing up, it just sort of fills the frame in a sense, like that your eye is immediately attracted to it. Isildur is looking at it, and so it becomes a focal point of the piece, and it's beautifully done, and it's very large. I think that on the inside and the outside, there's no inscription. There's a limit to that, but it is that huge, size that again tells the story of when he cut this out of Sauron's hand. And then in his left hand, of course, you see the hilt of Narsil, which is going to be Andoril reforged. Now, one little nitpick, of course, which can't really be helped, is that the tip of Narsil is a little bit crude, in terms of how it's done. I'm just gonna try to put a finger here so you can see it a little bit better. So it's not as much jaggedness. Like the edges are not quite as jagged as in the one-to-one stainless steel replica. So I kind of wish that it had been a little bit better sculpted to kind of show you the jagged edges of the break. And the paint's fine, the dirt, all of that. The hilt itself is very accurate, but my only one little nitpick is, I feel like the broken shard is a little bit too clean, if that makes any sense. Hopefully you can see that. It just seems a little bit too smooth here. There should be more jagged edges where it was shattered. Especially if you sort of look a little bit closer at the broken pieces of the rest of the blade, it just seems that this is this just seems a little bit more plastic-like, for instance. Not quite as good. I mean, of course, optimally, this entire thing, as as the other remnants on the ground, would be real metal. But real metal costs a lot of money, and Weta has very clearly gone away from that. But this is one situation or one scenario where actual metal, to be like if they used actual multimedia metal, would have really added quite a lot to the piece. So there you have that. So we've gone over the base, the helm of Sauron, which I really love, the amazing work on the armor, as well as especially kind of the chainmail, the details of the armor. Now, Numenorian armor is very beautiful, very detailed, very beautiful, a lot of designs, and very challenging, obviously, to recreate in statue form. And the sculptor and Weta and the factory have done again stunning job in recreating all the detail, painting it. You can just see the multiple leather straps, the buckles, the chainmail, the tunic, the cloak. It just the sword. It just goes on and on. All the inscriptions. You can't say enough about the work they did on the armor. So then we finally move to Isildur himself, his face. So it's not going to come across very well in a YouTube video, even say of this quality, whether it's 4K or high def. But they used translucent resin for him. I don't know if this is something that Weta has kind of moved to permanently as a standard for all of their human portraits in statue form. I think Isildur is similar, and they might have done this with maybe one of the elven infantrymen. But the bottom line is this is translucent resin. You can clearly see it in person. It may not show up quite as easily on YouTube camera, but this is translucent resin, and you can definitely immediately tell because it gives you sort of a quality that's very reminiscent of silicon. Now, let's not get crazy. It's not silicon. It's nowhere near as good, but it gives you a taste of it. It gives you a hint and an impression of that. And that's very good and very important for human beings, because that particular effect, the translucent resin effect, as well as the silicon, of course, the silicon is the gold standard, but that translucent resin properly painted really gives you kind of the depth and the glow of real skin, okay? And they do manage to do that. Again, in person, there is absolutely a difference when the shadows play over his face, that it feels like real, a bit more like real skin. Way better than normal, let's just say polished or normal resin. And then that has to be painted. And oftentimes the factory is not able to take the time to paint, of course, with the proper shading and depth to give you real good effect. The colors for the face and the flesh is often very flat, and you just get this very like flat, unconvincing paint job for skin. This is a major problem with a lot of production pieces, both custom and licensed. And Sideshow, to their credit, avoids a lot of this because of their use of translucent resin and also working with the painters in the factories to properly do it. You have to paint translucent resin a little bit differently than regular resin, and done incorrectly, it ruins the effect. And so for them to have taken the time to use translucent resin, knowing that they have to invest that extra time and money for the factory painters to do a reasonable job, is definitely, a mark in Sideshow Weta's favor. And it seems like this is something that's a long-term commitment, because they're using it for a lot of their human 6th scale statues. Even like not a hero statue, for instance. I mean, we have obviously, if we have Gandalf or Aragorn or whatnot, one of the main characters, you would expect this. But they did it even for minor characters, even for, again, like an Avendio or an Isildur, or like just a random high elven infantry person. They're using this technique, which means that they are very committed to it, and that's good, because the more they're committed to it, the more pieces these factories do, the more practice they do, the better the paint job at the production level, the better the effect. So that's a lot of background just to let you know that this is actually one of their best likenesses in a while. If you've seen Isildur in the movies, you definitely feel like they captured the actor's likeness, and the way he's looking at the ring. That's really, really good. I'm looking at the eyes right there. There's no googly eyes. It's not, in different directions. It's clearly concentrated on the one ring. So excellent there. And the beard and the eyebrows are also reasonably well done, as is the hair. This is, of course, one of the limitations of resin. And as somebody who's been really collecting a lot of J&D statues, I'm reminded about that, which is that for a while there, by the way, there was a thought that maybe translucent resin could eventually replace silicon, because there is a question of how long silicon can last. Collectors are sort of worried about that. There's also a worry about properly maintaining silicon. How are you gonna get rid of the dust of those things? There were some questions surrounding silicon decades ago, and so for a while there was some talk that maybe you can replace the silicon with something like translucent resin, or something very much like the material, like the plastic material that Hot Toys uses. I know that Blitzway has partnered up with Prime One Studios to create these situations where they'll supply the portraits with their kind of magical touch of realism, and they're using essentially plastic or vinyl to create the pores and the detail. And that may be, in my opinion, even the best translucent resin effect, or even the best of things that Blitzway can do, is still going to be short of what silicon can deliver. There just simply is no replacement for how real and supple that material is in terms of replicating human skin. If the very, very best, I think, from Prime One, Blitzway, and translucent resin, I think the very best is like a B plus, whereas silicon can get A's and A pluses. So that's a difference. That's a gap that I don't think can be crossed. And I would say that this likeness is like an A, and I think that how convincing it is in terms of flesh is like a B plus. It's very well done. By the end of the day, what you can't fake is the hair. and the hair is still going to be, solid and as beautifully done as this hair is, with the multiple details and the flowing locks. I'm doing a super close up to all of this. I mean, it's convincing as real hair, and you can see the stubble of the beard and then the mustache and all of that, the eyebrows. It's still not going to be the same as if, this was punched in, if the hairline was punched in, one hair at a time into like the silicone scalp and is styled. It's just not quite the same. But, this is very good. I mean, like I said, I would call this a very strong B+. But only silicone, in my opinion, with a hand punched in hair and the kind of the texture, only that's going to be able to give you like an AA+. Okay. But the portrait is definitely one of the highlights of the piece, because they really nailed the likeness of the actor. They nailed the expression, and the fact that it's translucent resin painted competently by the factory is a huge, mark in its favor. So that is why this is one of the best statues that Sideshow Weta has ever made. This is why I made an exception and decided to buy him on the secondary market for close to $1,000, shipping included, to add him to my collection when I normally never collect humans. I only collect Balrogs and cave trolls and smogs, for instance. And in fact, he's the only, Lord of the Rings human piece in my entire collection. I had sold every one of the others many, many years ago, over 15 years ago, but I decided to make an exception and get this guy because he's so amazing. From the base, the helm of Sauron, from the shards of Narsil, the one ring in his hand, the remnant of the hilt of Narsil in the other one, his amazing likeness, his kind of just focused, intense expression, and of course the one ring in the center of it, the magnificent armor. This is just a statue that has so many wonderful things going for it, that it really is one of Weta Workshop's masterpieces, in my opinion. Extraordinarily underrated because he is not a main character. So he's not Aragorn or Gandalf, Legolas, etc. But as far as that ancient classic design, that Weta spent so many years making, and the thing that made Lord of the Rings unique, because all of that design process, that they spent so much time in that labor of love, creating the culture of the Númenóreans. This is armor and characters that will be seen on the big screen for literally seconds, maybe a minute or two at most. But they poured so much energy into kind of fabricating the culture and creating these pieces of armor that will be convincing, and it shows on the movie. That's what makes it, these movies some of the greatest ever made. And then to replicate that in statue form is like an amazing accomplishment. And so all of that, said and done, is why I think this piece is so highly sought after, and why at $750, it's a bit more than, let's just say, $500. You're not going to find one of these popping up for sale very often, because most of the time when it gets to a collector, they do keep it forever, because it's definitely one of the crown jewels of the entire line. And I'm, of course, sorry to have missed it when it first came out, but I'm glad that once I sort of understood how good it was, I was able to finally acquire one, and then to do a video review for you guys to hopefully show you why this is such an amazing piece. I've been just sort of, moving him around in a circle from both distance as well as a lot of close-up shots. Again, hoping that you can appreciate some of the details of the armor that's been done. There you go. And he's so good, it's made me sort of ask myself whether I want to, spend the money to get the companion piece, which is, it's not the companion piece, okay, but in my mind, his father, Elendil, there's another statue just released this year of Elendil. That's supposed to be partnered actually with Sauron. But, the son and the father, and of course, Elendil has the same type of Númenórean armor, except it's, worthy of a king. He's holding Narsil unbroken. It's not quite, of course, as good as this, because, you don't have all of these memories, in the sense that you don't have Sauron's helmet, you don't have the One Ring, excuse me, but But that amazing detail to armor is still going to be there. The translucent resin is still going to be there. And the armor for King Elendio might be even more impressive in its own way than Isildur's armor. So I'm still debating whether I want to add Elendio to my collection, just because of, again, the incredible quality of the work that I see with this piece. That's how special this piece is that not only did it make me break my rule against human pieces, but it's made me even consider, breaking it again for his father, for King Elendio himself. So again, I wish you guys a Merry Christmas and for those of you who celebrate it, a Merry Christmas, and of course, Happy Holidays. And hopefully I'll put another review on for maybe New Year's, depending on how things go. But have a safe and joyful celebration. And until next time, do take care.